They whispered it together, leaning closer than they should. "You're our secret chapter." And in that moment, I realized some stories aren't meant for anyone else to read. I had never considered myself the type to wander into a book club. Books were my escape, yes, but the thought of sitting in a circle with strangers, dissecting plots and characters, felt intimidating. Yet that Thursday evening, I found myself walking into the softly lit room of a small, independent bookstore tucked into a quiet street corner. The scent of aged paper and faint coffee hit me immediately, wrapping around me like a gentle, invisible embrace. The quiet chatter of fellow readers filled the space, punctuated by the occasional creak of a wooden chair or the subtle shuffle of pages. And then I saw them. 3 women, seated together near the back, laughing quietly at something one of them said. Their presence didn't demand attention, but it captured it anyway, a delicate gravity. One brushed her hair back behind her ear, revealing a slender neck and the faint shimmer of a gold earring. Another's eyes crinkled in amusement, her smile warm yet measured, as if she had learned the art of keeping the world at a gentle distance. The third leaned slightly forward, the soft curve of her lips forming a half-smile, and there was a subtle spark in her gaze, sharp yet inviting. I was acutely aware of the age difference. They were older, elegant in a way that suggested both experience and quiet confidence, but it only made them more intriguing. As I walked toward the circle to introduce myself, my nerves hummed in my chest. Every small detail felt magnified. The soft rustle of my jacket as I adjusted it, the smooth weight of the book in my hands, the faint warmth of sunlight spilling through dusty windows. One of the women glanced up at me as I passed, and our eyes met for a fleeting second. It wasn't just a look. It was an unspoken acknowledgement, a tiny crack in the invisible wall between us. I felt my pulse quicken in a way I hadn't expected, a mixture of excitement and hesitation. They welcomed me with polite smiles and soft greetings. There was a warmth in their tone that made me feel simultaneously at ease and acutely aware of my own inexperience in their world. I noticed how they interacted with one another, subtle gestures of familiarity, a hand brushing lightly across an arm, a shared glance that spoke volumes without words. It was elegant, unforced, and intoxicating in its quiet intimacy. Taking my seat, I found myself hyper-aware of my surroundings. The faint scent of coffee lingered near them, mingling with the subtle perfume of their hair. I could hear the soft scratch of pens across paper and the shuffle of pages as they prepared for the discussion. But all I could think about were them, their voices, their movements, the way they carried themselves with ease and quiet strength. And in that moment, as the meeting began and I fumbled slightly over my own introduction, I realized that I wasn't just here for the books. Something else had drawn me in, something I couldn't quite name yet. It was curiosity, yes, but deeper, a quiet, insistent pull, as though these 3 women were the first lines of a story I hadn't known I was meant to read. The next week, I returned to the book club, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and self-consciousness. I wasn't sure if it was the books, the warm glow of the room, or the presence of the 3 women that drew me back. Perhaps it was all of it. As I stepped inside, the faint aroma of coffee and old paper greeted me again, grounding me in a comforting familiarity. During the discussion, a moment of unexpected intimacy occurred. We were reaching for the same copy of the book. Our hands collided lightly on the worn cover. A spark of warmth shot up my arm, subtle but undeniable, as her fingers lingered just a second too long before she pulled back. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, the conversation around us faded. She smiled, small, knowing, with the faintest flicker of amusement, and I felt my chest tighten in a way that made me both nervous and exhilarated. As the discussion unfolded, I found myself drawn into their orbit. They laughed together, and I laughed too, learning to match their timing, their subtle humor. One of them nudged me gently under the table when I mispronounced a character's name. Nothing overt, but enough to send a warm ripple through me. It wasn't teasing in a cruel way. It was gentle, inclusive, as if I had passed some unspoken test. I noticed how they leaned slightly closer to me during certain points of the discussion, their shoulders angling in my direction, their voices softer when speaking directly to me. Each gesture left a lingering sense of connection, unspoken yet powerful. I became conscious of details I hadn't noticed before. The delicate way one woman tucked her hair behind her ear when she spoke. The way another's fingers tapped lightly on the table when she was excited about a plot twist. The way the third's eyes followed me briefly before returning to the book in her lap. These small, intimate moments made the room feel simultaneously larger and smaller. Larger because the world seemed full of possibilities I hadn't considered. Smaller because these gestures drew me in and made me acutely aware of proximity, of closeness. After the meeting, they invited me to linger over coffee. The cafe's warmth wrapped around us, the hum of conversation fading into the background as we talked about everything and nothing. Hands brushed against mine while passing sugar packets. Shoulders occasionally touched, brief sparks of awareness traveling through me. The subtle physical contact, paired with their laughter and the light in their eyes, left me feeling both flustered and at ease. By the time I left, I realized I was thinking of them constantly. The warmth of their presence, the gentle intimacy of shared jokes, the way small gestures carried more weight than words. For the first time, I understood that connection could exist quietly, in brief touches and lingering glances, in gestures too fleeting for anyone else to notice. I wasn't just intrigued by their conversation anymore. I was captivated by them, drawn in by the delicate gravity of their attention, and aware that, somehow, I was becoming part of their orbit, without anyone saying a word. A week later, after another lively discussion at the book club, they invited me to join them for coffee at a quiet cafe nearby. The invitation felt casual, but the underlying intention was unmistakable. As I walked with them through the golden glow of late afternoon, I felt acutely aware of the difference between this and any ordinary social gathering. There was a rhythm to our steps, a subtle alignment, as if we were unconsciously moving in sync. Three confident, graceful women and me, a younger man quietly navigating the space between admiration and intrigue. Inside the cafe, the aroma of fresh coffee and baked bread enveloped us. I chose a seat across from them, but our bodies leaned toward one another naturally, narrowing the physical distance without the need for explanation. One of them reached across to adjust the sugar jar, and her fingers brushed mine, light, accidental, and lingering. The warmth lingered on my skin longer than it should have, a quiet echo that made me more aware of her presence. As conversation meandered from books to personal lives, I began to see new layers to each of them. The first woman spoke about a failed project at work, her voice calm but threaded with a vulnerability she didn't often reveal. I noticed her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her coffee cup as she spoke, a subtle gesture of self-soothing. The second shared a memory of a past love, her eyes distant yet sparkling with the bittersweet humor of hindsight. The third, who often appeared the most playful, admitted a small insecurity, her lips curving into a shy smile as she spoke, almost as if testing whether I would notice. I found myself opening up too, sharing small, carefully chosen pieces of myself, my own disappointments, hopes, and quiet ambitions. Their eyes softened when I spoke, their expressions attentive and almost protective. For a fleeting moment, I felt the rare sensation of being truly seen, as if my thoughts and feelings mattered in a way they often did not in the outside world. It was in these shared confessions that our connection deepened. Words were important, yes, but the subtler forms of communication, the way their shoulders shifted toward me, the brief touch of a hand on mine as we laughed, the unspoken pauses where all four of us simply absorbed the presence of one another, carried far more weight. I realized that trust was being built here, layer by layer, gesture by gesture. By the time we left the cafe, dusk had fallen, painting the streets in a muted amber. The women walked closely around me, their presence a quiet, grounding force. I could feel the warmth of their proximity, the subtle fragrance of coffee, perfume, and the evening air mingling in a way that left me dizzy with awareness. I understood, in that lingering silence between words, that this connection was already more than casual acquaintance. There was an exclusivity forming, a sense that I had become a part of something private, something precious. As I said goodbye, their smiles held a hint of mischief and secrecy, and I walked home with my mind buzzing. This was no longer just about books. It was about trust, subtle intimacy, and the quiet thrill of being drawn into their world, one secret, shared gesture at a time. That evening, the book club felt different. We had gathered at a small, softly lit lounge attached to the bookstore, a space with low shelves of old volumes, worn leather chairs, and the faint scent of vanilla candles lingering in the air. The atmosphere was quiet, intimate, yet charged with a subtle energy I hadn't felt before. They had arranged themselves around me almost unconsciously, a gentle triangulation that made my presence central, noticed, somehow, essential. As the discussion unfolded, one of the women leaned closer to me while pointing out a favorite passage. Her hair brushed my shoulder, a whisper of warmth that made my chest tighten. She laughed softly at something I said, and I realized her laughter lingered longer than necessary, her gaze holding mine with an intensity that was both teasing and curious. I felt a strange mixture of nervousness and exhilaration, a thrilling awareness that every small movement, every subtle glance, seemed deliberately orchestrated in a way I couldn't yet understand. Another woman joined in, resting her hand briefly on my forearm as she emphasized a point. The contact was innocent by any ordinary measure, but it carried weight, electric in its intimacy. I felt the heat of her touch linger, the gentle pressure creating a strange resonance in my chest, a sense of being noticed, appreciated, and somehow chosen. I found myself hyper-aware of every motion, the tilt of her head, the way her eyes sparkled when she smiled, the soft brush of her sleeve as it grazed my hand. Each gesture felt like a sentence in an unspoken story, a secret chapter written only for me. They began to speak more playfully, lowering their voices to a conspiratorial murmur. I leaned in slightly to catch their words, heart pounding, realizing that I was being pulled into something private. One of them, with a sly grin, whispered, "You know, you're our secret chapter." The words were light, teasing, but the meaning struck deeper than I could have anticipated. It wasn't just a joke, it was acknowledgement, recognition, a quiet claim of connection that felt thrilling, vulnerable, and real. I wanted to respond, to bridge the gap between words and feeling, but hesitation rooted me in place. I was acutely conscious of the age difference, of the societal expectations, and my own uncertainty. Yet, even as doubts flickered through my mind, I felt a deep, undeniable pull toward them. The warmth of their proximity, the subtle scent of their hair mingling with the faint vanilla in the room, and the gentle, deliberate touches, a hand resting on a wrist, a shoulder brushing my own, created a cocoon of intimacy that left me both comforted and electrified. By the end of the evening, the secret chapter was no longer a casual phrase. It was a feeling, a bond forming in the quiet spaces between laughter, between gestures, between words that were never spoken aloud. I walked home with a head full of possibilities, the echo of their touches and voices lingering like the softest music, knowing that something significant, delicate, unspoken, and profoundly compelling had begun. The following week, the invitation came again, a quiet, unassuming proposal to meet after the book club, just the four of us, in the corner of the bookstore where the light fell softest through the high windows. There was a subtle tension in the air, a sense that tonight would be different. As I arrived, the familiar scent of coffee mingled with the faint warmth of candle wax and the soft musk of the women's perfumes. The bookstore, usually buzzing with chatter and rustling pages, felt like a private world carved just for us. We settled into the worn leather chairs in a tight circle. The conversation started casually, about books and favorite passages, but gradually the topic shifted, almost imperceptibly, toward personal truths. One by one, the women began to share fragments of themselves, vulnerabilities they didn't reveal to just anyone. The first spoke of a project that had failed despite her dedication, her voice steady yet threaded with unspoken disappointment. Her hand rested lightly on the table, occasionally brushing my own when reaching for her coffee, a silent gesture of inclusion and trust. The second woman shared a memory of a love long past, eyes reflecting both humor and regret. Her fingers traced the rim of her cup as she spoke, and I noticed the gentle tension in her shoulders, a quiet echo of her guardedness. The third, who often appeared playful and unflappable, revealed a hidden insecurity with a tentative smile, testing the waters of our connection. Each confession felt like a delicate thread weaving us closer together, a tapestry of trust forming between us. I found myself opening up in turn, speaking quietly but honestly about my own fears and hesitations, the unease of entering a world that felt older, wiser, and more experienced than my own. I shared moments of self-doubt, reflections on the weight of perception, and my cautious curiosity about the growing bond one felt with them. Their expressions softened as I spoke, eyes attentive, bodies leaning subtly toward mine. Their presence was grounding, yet electric, as if the air itself charged slightly at each word. Physical intimacy, though minimal, became a language of its own. Fingers brushed lightly across mine when passing objects, shoulders nudged mine in shared laughter, and once, without thought, one of them rested her hand over mine, just for a heartbeat, enough to make my pulse spike, enough to anchor me in the moment. Each contact was deliberate yet understated, conveying reassurance, warmth, and an unspoken acknowledgement of our growing closeness. By the end of the evening, the emotional stakes had shifted. The casual camaraderie of our earlier meetings had deepened into something more potent, mutual vulnerability and quiet desire, tempered by respect and understanding. The women's smiles held a knowing softness, and I could feel a subtle, collective decision forming, an unspoken promise that this connection, fragile and intense, would be protected, nurtured, and kept between us. Walking home later, I replayed their words and gestures over and over. I realized that I had crossed into a private space of trust and intimacy, a place where I was not just observed, but seen, valued, and quietly cherished. The thrill of being this secret chapter, no longer a playful tease, but a profound, shared truth, pulsed through me with a warmth that left me both exhilarated and profoundly content. A weekend afternoon found us together again, this time outside the bookstore in a small, sun-dappled park. The air was crisp with the early hints of autumn, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves mixed with the faint sweetness of late-blooming flowers. It was unremarkable, ordinary even, a stroll through the park, but with them, every ordinary moment became subtly charged, each gesture layered with unspoken meaning. We walked in a loose cluster, the three women around me, their conversation flowing easily between laughter, playful teasing, and thoughtful reflections. I noticed the way their presence shaped the space around me, how one would fall into step beside me, her shoulder occasionally brushing mine, another slightly behind, giving a gentle nudge with her elbow when a joke was shared. Each touch was casual, but in its simplicity carried warmth and reassurance, a tactile punctuation to the quiet rhythm of our connection. We eventually settled on a weathered bench beneath a large oak tree, sunlight filtering through the leaves to cast mottled patterns on our clothes and skin. One of them pulled out a book and began reading aloud, her voice soft and melodic, filling the space with a calm intimacy. I felt my hand inch closer to hers on the bench, neither of us moving deliberately, yet the faint brush of fingertips against mine sent a thrill of warmth through me. She didn't pull away, and the subtle, lingering contact felt like an affirmation, a quiet, mutual acknowledgement that our closeness was welcome. The third woman leaned her head slightly toward me while laughing at a shared joke, the soft brush of her hair against my arm stirring an awareness I couldn't easily name. I caught myself studying the curve of her smile, the way her eyes crinkled when amused, the gentle way she shifted her weight closer. The second woman rested her hand briefly against my knee while gesturing, the casual gesture carrying a warmth that made my pulse quicken. None of these touches were overt, none of them demanded attention, yet the accumulation of them made my senses hyper-aware, attuned to the subtle language of physical intimacy. At one point, the conversation lulled into a comfortable silence. We simply sat together, the sunlight warming our shoulders, the rustle of leaves above, the distant hum of the city creating a soft soundtrack. Their presence was grounding and exhilarating all at once, an unspoken confirmation that I belonged here, in this delicate equilibrium of attention, care, and quiet desire. I noticed the way they glanced at me in turns, their eyes holding a depth of emotion that words hadn't yet caught. By the time we left the park, I was enveloped in a profound sense of contentment. The intimacy we shared wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, tactile, and emotionally resonant. It existed in the brush of fingers, the soft pressure of a hand, the shared space of laughter and silence. In those hours, I understood that connection could be gentle and powerful at once, and that this secret chapter they had entrusted me with was becoming as much a part of me as I was of them. The final evening came with a quiet anticipation that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. The bookstore had arranged a small gathering in the back corner, away from the usual hustle of readers browsing shelves. The low, amber glow of candles flickered across the walls, casting soft shadows and painting the worn leather chairs with gentle light. There was a quiet intimacy in the air, a feeling that this space, and this moment, belonged solely to us. As I entered, they were already there, seated in a loose semicircle, their expressions a mixture of warmth, mischief, and tender acknowledgement. I noticed the way their eyes softened when they saw me, a look that spoke of trust, affection, and unspoken understanding. For the first time, I felt a profound sense of inclusion, not just as an observer, but as a participant in something delicate, beautiful, and private. We talked, laughed, and shared moments of quiet reflection. The conversation flowed effortlessly, as if the world beyond those walls had ceased to exist. Their touches were gentle, affectionate, and deeply meaningful, a hand brushing mine as we reached for a book, a shoulder resting briefly against mine, a playful nudge of knees under the small table. Each movement carried layers of intimacy, subtle, YouTube-safe, but emotionally resonant. I felt the warmth of their presence, the gentle weight of their attention, and the quiet power of shared understanding. At one point, they all leaned slightly closer, and one of them, with a smile that hinted at mischief and sincerity simultaneously, whispered, "You've been our secret chapter all along." The words were light, teasing, yet they landed with a weight that made my chest ache in the best way. I realized then that this chapter wasn't just theirs. It was ours, co-written through laughter, shared confessions, subtle touches, and the gentle weaving of trust over time. We lingered in that moment, letting the silence speak. My hand found theirs, each of them in turn, a quiet chain of connection that grounded me in the shared intimacy of our bond. One leaned against my shoulder, the faint fragrance of her perfume brushing against my skin. Another rested her fingers lightly over mine, and the third's knee nudged mine gently. The sensation was electric in its softness, a tactile reassurance of mutual care and acceptance. As the evening drew to a close, I felt a profound sense of completeness. There were no dramatic declarations, no sudden climaxes, only the steady, gentle affirmation that we belonged to one another in this private, cherished space. Walking home later, the memory of their touches, their voices, their smiles, lingered like a soft melody. I realized that this secret chapter was not a fleeting intrigue, but a lasting, deeply felt connection that would remain with me long after the bookstore doors had closed. For the first time in my life, I understood the quiet power of intimacy that was both gentle and unwavering. I felt seen, cherished, and accepted, not just as the younger man in their world, but as someone who had earned a place in their hearts. And in that understanding, the story reached its quiet, perfect resolution, a chapter shared, a bond sealed, and a secret kept in the most beautiful way imaginable.